This video is a walkthrough of the Structural T project. It's a print walkthrough of how to read the print to build it. So here's the overall print. After this, we're going to look at focused areas of the print, what to read and how to read it. So looking at the print, you can see that this is the way it should be organized. You have your front view on the lower left, you have your right side view on the right of that, and above that your top side view, and in the upper right corner you have a detail and then notes on the right, and at the bottom you've got your legend. The first place we want to look on any print is the lower right. That's in green, which is our legend. That's of course going to give us who the project is for, what the name of the project is, how many pages there are, when it was drawn, who drew it, what it's made out of, our tolerances, and there could be other information there as well. The second part we want to look at is notes in blue. Now the notes are going to be instructions from the maker of the print on what they want, specific instructions, how it's to be built, important things that need to be kept in mind. Basically consider the rules of the game here. And of these, I put a big red star by 10 because that's a very critical one that many students seem to be overlooking, which is that do not weld out until part passes inspection, which means I need to approve it before you continue. And this is very common in many forms of manufacturing. There are also blue arrows there as well. Number one points to where it is located on the print itself. So many of these notes call out parts of the print. Another important one is 3 through holes in the coating thermal process. That points to a very small detail, which is dotted lines on the back side of the tube indicating that is a through hole going through the part, and that's easily missed. Number 5, right face detail right there, which shows you what the right face looked like, because putting it on the print itself would add too many lines and confusing details. It's easier to show it as a detail itself. And for number 1, bolt holes are aligned in a common plane. That is explained further on the second page. That says see page 2 right there. So the notes are very important to look through and keep in mind, because remember, a print is a legally binding contract. So these are like the riders in a legal contract, things we must observe to be compliant with this contract. So breaking any one of these things can be grounds for invalidating the entire project. So it's very important. These are the rules and we must follow them. The next detail I want to point out here are highlighted in green, which is this part has center lines running through all the pipes and along the sides. And if you remember the rules about that with center lines, it means that where that line is, it's symmetrical. It has symmetry, and that is a very, very important thing. Whatever these symmetrical lines, these center lines are, they should be repeated in the object itself. A really good way is to chalk them, scribe them, or use a pen to put these center lines on the part itself as we're building it. So what you see on the print is what you should have on the table in front of you. This will help keep things aligned, keep things where they should be, and make it very easy to spot mistakes, because things that are not put on correctly will be out of symmetry and be very easy to pick up. All the green highlights here are all of the dimensions. So we want to look at all those one by one, and then what we want to do here is actually compare them to the physical parts. Now, sometimes you make the parts themselves, but very often you don't. In this case, we're not making the parts because they've already been supplied to us. But we want to check all these measurements to make sure that the parts conform to these measurements, and if they're not correct, reject them and then find parts that are correct. Because we had instances where there were parts that looked the same, but on measurement were of a different thickness or slightly different length or width, and the parts had to be taken apart. So it's very, very important. Other measurements on this here show where the parts are in relation to each other. So details like the 3/8 in the top view that shows that clearly this is a corner-to-corner construction. Other measurements showing the angle that those bent parts in the front side are to be 20 degrees. That's very important. And all of these together are things that need to be checked, and if anything does not match these measurements, it needs to be rejected immediately and not continue at that point. The dimensions in red on this view are all of the weld symbols. And when we look at all of the, we want to look at these all very carefully because they give us very important information about not just the weld size or type of welds they are, but also how they will be executed, which is what kind of process we're going to use here. So all of them are fairly simple. There are fillet welds throughout. Some of the circles you notice on the elbow part, which indicate weld all the way around, like on the pipe sections and on the flanges. The ones that we do want to look at more closely are the weld symbol attached to the detail and the weld symbol that is attached to the bent features in the top view. And you'll see that as an 1/8 inch leg fillet weld that is 1/4 inch long, 1 inch on center. And we're going to have a closer view of that in the next picture. So looking at just that weld symbol, the drawing underneath it kind of shows what it's supposed to look like. So the 1/8 inch is the leg of the actual weld, and then the 1/4 inch is the length of the weld, and that's 1 inch on center. So it's going to be a quarter, a quarter, a quarter, each one 1 inch on center on both sides equally. So having the two fillet weld symbols opposite each other means that those 1/4 inch welds are going to be on both sides equally. Now, if those triangles were not directly across from each other, what they call staggered, then you'd have kind of a zigzag staggered pattern. So this is very important. This is done because maybe a full weld could distort the part. It's not needed, so to make it lighter and prevent distortion, we're only stitching it on. That's a very important detail to keep down because adding too much weld can be just as bad as adding too little. So here's another close-up view of that particular weld. Now the easiest way to do this is to pull out a ruler or a tape measure and actually mark it out with a chalk or a Sharpie or a pencil or a scribe every 1 inch and mark out that 1/4 inch length weld, and then so as you're welding it, everything will look even and precise. This is very, very important. Any stitch welds that are not done evenly will really stand out and look really horrible. So we want to make sure this is done correctly. Now, very importantly here is we're going to start this from the center of the part itself. So everything is on center. This will mean that you'll probably reach the ends of the part and may not be a space where there's a weld. Now, the rule is the ends of the part are always going to be welded no matter what the part is. So even if you do the pattern from the center and it doesn't fall on that 1 inch center for say, you're going to weld it anyway because you don't want to leave any unwelded ends of the part. The next weld symbol we want to take a closer look at is the one that's attached to the detail, the number, that 25 detail, that's the alternate right face. Now this one says all the way around, has an 1/8 inch fillet weld, and it says gas tungsten arc welding. Now you want to look at this very, very carefully because in the next slide you're going to see a very, very interesting thing about this particular weld that isn't all obvious. Now this illustration is of the weld symbol that is attached to the detail 1, the number 25. Now this is really important here. Okay, both of these are 1/8 inch leg welds. On the left side you have a filler wire weld, and on the right you have a fusion or autogenous weld, which is done with the TIG torch without adding filler wire. Now these are both 1/8 inch welds, okay, and they are measured by the leg length, which in the autogenous weld case is the leg length of the heat affected zone created by using the fusion weld with the torch. Even though we're not adding any filler wire, that weld symbol still applies. So this is a case where, based upon the type of joint, the size, it's kind of a judgment call, and if it isn't explicitly called out in the weld symbol tail or in the notes, if it's small enough, it could be a fusion weld, and you're still complying with the weld symbol. So the welder needs to check that and make the best judgment if it's not explicitly stated. Our final slide here is the page 2. Now the page 2 is detailing the shape of the flanges, because putting them into the page 1 would just put too many circles and lines on top of each other and be just kind of messy and distracting. So this is put on page 2, and here it talks about the standard method for lining the bolt holes in the pipe flanges, what they call a two-hole method. So the green line, again, these are center lines, and the two top holes are going to be leveled to the earth itself using a level of some sort, so that the bolt holes on one part of this object and on the other part, which are 90 degrees to each other, are both going to be aligned in what's called a common plane, and that's established by using a level. There's a common method used in any flange or pipe at all, and we're going to follow that here. So take care when putting them on, because the go-no-go gauge follows this pattern, so all the bolt holes need to line up in both the top and on the and on the other side of the part. So please make sure you check against the go-no-go gauge to make sure they work before you weld it up.